He has 12 years in information security experience, but he still considers himself a social engineer noob. I'm going to quote him on this. He enjoys all aspects of info security, but enjoys creeping on people and infrastructure using OSINT the most. And he's even though he's kind of creepy, he has been accused of having a man crush on the human hacker. Okay.
Notice that's accused, isn't
it? Accused, yes. This talk is not sponsored by his organization, and if it was, he may be unemployed after giving it. So let's give him our attention. Fahey Owens. The theme is Beyond Phishing, Building and Sustaining a Corporate SE Program.
Thank you, DEF CON, the SE Village. Thanks, Chris and Michelle, for this opportunity. I'm a cybersecurity manager at some financial services company. If you Google me, it'd be pretty easy to find. I've managed an ethical hacking team, vulnerability management team, and I have a social engineering team. And they're here today. And if you have any questions about this talk, email me or you can follow me on Twitter. But I have an announcement to make. I'm in recovery for I've been addicted to social engineering for a long time, and I'm in a recovery program for it. But I wasn't always addicted. In fact, I really didn't believe in social engineering about 4 or 5 years ago. I used to go to DEF CON over when they were in Rio, see the social engineering village, come in, take a seat, take a look at people in this smelly box. I'd stay there for a couple of minutes and I'd leave because I really didn't believe in it. And I managed the ethical hacking team at the time. And then things changed. You see, one day I came to work and my boss said, "We want you to phish the people." And I'm like, why would I want to do that? You want me to do what? Phish the people? That's no fun. You know, I was into web applications, thick clients, and things of that nature. I did not want to phish the people, and no one on my team wanted to do that as well. So how hard could it be? You put a phish together, send an email out, and I did that, and it was disaster. We interrupt operations. The help desk was flooded with calls. The mail team was flooded with calls. And the incident response team was flooded with calls. So I started thinking. I got a chance to redeem myself. And I had to find a way to answer this question of phishing an organization. So I do what we all do when we have problems. We go to Google. And when I searched Google, I ran up on the social-engineer.org website. Why? That's the same website of the team that manages the SE Village. So I went there, and I listened to all the podcasts that were there. And I listened to Chris go through puberty in the podcast from number 1 to podcast 60. I'm just saying, Chris, your voice did get deeper as you moved on. And then I listened to podcast 44, because that's when the sultry Asian first started. I listened to that podcast about 3 or 4 times. Yeah, I'm a little creepy. 3 or 4. And I read all the SE books, and then I created a methodology. One of the things in this methodology that I created was to communicate, was to tell the people, okay? And I did that, and I had some success. Now, people still failed, but I did not interrupt the organization's operations at the time. You see, when you're running ethical hacking or you're running vulnerability assessments, you only need to let the system owner know that you're going to perform an assessment. And they usually complain because you know they're going to end up with findings. But when you test the people and you let them know that it's coming, they're like, oh, okay. And I did that. But see, it comes with a cost. You see that chart at the bottom down there with the line going down? That's not the click rate. That's your popularity. You see, you will not be popular if you're phishing an entire organization continuously. So, started thinking, is this really a career? Do people really get paid for this besides Chris and Michelle? What about the other 3 deadly social engineering sins, such as USB, smishing, and phishing? Well, did a Google search, and it seems that social engineering is in good company. It was listed as one of the top 6 well-paying jobs of 2014, right between bomb disposal diver and power line helicopter pilot, and it was still right behind the elusive ethical hacker. But where are the jobs really today? You see, I did a search on the Google, do a little Google dorking, and you see Indeed.com has 8,442 jobs. That's enough jobs for us all, right? Well, Indeed Simply Hired had 150, and ZipRecruiter had 1. You see, those aren't real jobs. Those are fake jobs, kind of like fake news. In fact, what they do is they take any hit against social and list it as a job. So it could be a social worker, it could be someone doing something with social media, and it's listed as a social engineering job. But let's take a closer look at that ZipRecruiter job. So this job, it has benefits, which we all need benefits. But if you look at the technical skills that you need about 5+ years of social engineering planning, 5+ years of phishing and vishing exercise experience, 5+ years operating a simulated phishing platform, and 5+ years of training and awareness. Now, who in here would really qualify for that job? No, you wouldn't. Hey, it's been 4 years. All right. 1. And you know what? That job was filled. That probably is who applied for it. The job was filled as of July 19th. And don't ask how I know. As was brought out earlier, we all know that the need for social engineering continues. Recently, in the IBM Cybersecurity Threat Intelligence Index, 95% of all data breaches involved some form of social engineering. In fact, it continues to impact us as people. The US elections, good old John Podesta getting a phishing email through the DNC. And recently they started to state that the French elections were impacted by social engineering as well. USBs haven't been out of the news. Just last year there was a study by the University of Illinois that stated about 95% of all students would plug in USB drives. And IBM recently shipped USB drives to its customers with malware. And when it comes to phishing, we don't need to go any further than our own family. Yes, your grandparents. Go and ask your grandparents if they've received a phishing call, whether from the IRS or the scam that was going around, asking if, can you hear me now? And they say yes, and they get signed up for some type of service to get something in the mail. So the need is still there, whether it's for corporate America. The need for training is still there, whether it's for corporate America or whether it's for us. But let's take a look at the millennials. This is the largest group as of 2015 that's employed in your corporation. They make up over half of all new hires. This group is the most technologically advanced group ever. They literally grew up with the internet, and they literally grew up with phones in their hands. This group prefers texting over phone calls, and in fact, most of them, over 68%, admit to texting a lot. Email for them is secondary. But even with this, overall email use continues to rise. So that goes to show you that phishing and smishing will be a vector for this generation that's coming in. I had a chance to do my own survey against millennials, and I had some pretty interesting results. 55% claim to know about social engineering, so that's pretty good. You can tell by the audience and by the size of the audience here. But 96% claim to have been phished or received an unsolicited phone call or text message within the last 6 months. 82% never heard of smishing. 90% never heard of vishing. And only 79% would say that they would not plug in a found USB drive or a mobile device. But this arrogant group, 50% of them claim they know how to handle all of the above, even though they never heard of 2 of them. Doing research on some of the data that I have access to, I see a bunch of them still fail phishing attempts. In fact, they fail more than us so-called old folks. Some more research shows that they have poor hygiene as far as security. There was a recent study that showed that of people who reuse their emails, of the total population that reused their passwords, of the total populace, 92% were millennials. In fact, another study showed that even though they're more comfortable using technology than their elders, that security doesn't flow down into the organization. So this is your organization, right? So how do you move beyond phishing to move to the next 3 deadly sins? Smishing, USB access, malicious media, or vishing. In my experience, I've had to deal with what I call the big 3: HR, legal, and people in the politics. So let's start with HR. We know their job. Their role is to help protect the people. They do payroll sometimes, they do benefits, and they hire people, and they probably regret hiring me. But you want to make sure that you're friends with this group. You want to make sure that you build a strong relationship with them, especially if you look to move past phishing. You don't want to do anything hypothetical like sending a payroll phishing email at the end of the month, which impacted payroll and your paycheck was messed up a little bit. And you also want to make sure that you're friends with legal. They do the thing, they do the right thing. They do all their lawyer stuff. I don't know much about law. But you want to make sure you understand what the operational impact of sending a phishing email or moving beyond that is. For instance, on a Friday night, you don't want to send any legal-related document because they are obligated to stay there. And some poor clerk may be there responding to a phishing email unknowingly. And not that any of this has happened. Now, let's move on to the last of the big three. Your company's politics and their ego. You see, I have listed Dr. Paul Ekman's 7 emotions. There's anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, surprise, and contempt. Now, you think about the size of your organization. You think about all of this is always constantly going on, that all these emotions are changing, all these triggers are happening at any moment of the day. And when you start to want to move past phishing and they get wind of it, it may be a problem. I can tell you that I've dealt with anger, disgust, and contempt the most out of all of these 7. And as you look to move forward with this, you may deal with these as well. So how do you tame that? How do you deal with the big 3? First off, you got to do your homework. You got to do the boring stuff. You got to go look at your organizational policies and standards, because that's the only way that you'll be able to make sure that your programs line up with what the organization says. How are you supposed to handle a suspicious phone call? How are you supposed to handle an unsolicited text message on your phone? Also, you want to add more meat by looking at the threat, by using real-time threat intelligence. You want to look at any threats that happen against your organization and any threats that happen against your industry or your stack. And also, you want to read any breach reports you can, because that'll help give you food as you move forward to introducing these new programs or new steps in your program. And most importantly, you want to create a methodology. You see, how are you going to handle USB drives across multiple organizations, multiple areas? How are you going to prepare them, and how are you going to destroy them? Because there's no way that you send them, even if a USB drive was brought back, there's no way you should send that back out in the field. The other thing was smishing. As we look into BYOD devices, you can run into legal issues about leaving artifacts on there if you decide to drop payload, and also the information that you pull back on those devices. And then phishing, pretexting. This is new language for them. They're not going to understand what a pretext is, so you're going to have to explain it, and also you're going to have to explain what the target should be and what the success rate is. If someone receives a phishing phone call, what are they supposed to do? You want to review your local privacy laws, just like they've done here in Nevada. And you also want to explain how often you're going to do your assessments. And once again, you got to communicate to the big 3. And you also want to sustain your program. You're going to want to do data analysis. You want to get all the data that you can from your phishing and smishing results. You want information like their age and their gender and their language and Department of Job roles. Getting this information will help you understand what the attack surface looks like in your organization when it comes to people. You'll be able to work with training and awareness and have them target their training towards certain parts of the organization. The other data that you receive from fails from smishing and from the other data that you receive from smishing and from phishing includes system and device patch information. You can use that to share with the vulnerability management team to help understand gaps that are in your environment for patching. And another thing you want to do, get real incidents. Work with the IR team. Find out the people who get real phishing emails and check to see what the test results are for them in those phishing emails. And that way you can also get at the training awareness and use that to help get specialized training. And again, continue that line of communication with the big 3 and continue that moving on. And overall, you want that to help improve your overall program. And also, you want to get creative. The organization gets tired or gets used to seeing just your normal fluorescent USB drives with something written across it. You got a bunch of millennials in there. They have short attention spans. So do things like, comic books or comic characters, things of that nature. And in your organization, people may be starving for hardware. Use mice. And I'm not saying you have to program the USB drives, but just use generic USB drives next to a mouse. You will be surprised what people plug in. Even if your organizational policy states that they're not supposed to plug in USB drives, they still plug in a bunch of other things. And if you don't believe me, get access to your SIEM logs. Also, don't try to boil the ocean. Get access to open source tools. Use the social engineering toolkit. Use Kingfisher. And just recently, we started looking at the smartphone pen test framework from Georgia Weidman. Other factors that may impact you as you want to move beyond phishing: the size of your organization. This may not work if it's about 100 people inside your organization, okay? And you also want to make sure you get your executive and leadership buy-in. I'm fortunate, or my organization is fortunate to have our leaders believe in all 4 aspects of social engineering, okay? And your budget. Again, when it comes to USB drives, not everybody can afford to get 200 rubber duckies, so you have to get creative. You may have to write batch files or scripts on those drives. And last but not least, your company culture. That plays a big part because, again, as you go against the third leg of that big 3, that can be quite challenging to get past. And if you can't get through any of them, don't try to boil the ocean, as the last speaker said. Choose just one. Maybe it's just smishing, or maybe it's just phishing, depending on if your organization has a large customer service base or a large mobile workforce. So the goal is to reduce the impact from all social engineering attacks. Most organizations are doing phishing today. One of the ways, but we want to push past phishing. And one of the ways to do that is create a methodology. We have to communicate with other parts of the organization as we move past phishing. And we also want to do continuous testing. Frequency depends upon your culture. And also you want to take all of your findings and make sure that you can get that tied into your social engineering awareness training programs. So in conclusion, if you're phishing and you're trying to move past that and get to the other 4, don't give up. It's taken me about 4 years to get to this point. Okay? And also, there's a real need for more social engineering jobs, not just fake ones out there on the web. So hopefully in the future, one day when you do a job search for social engineer, you'll find about 200 plus jobs. Thanks. Any questions?
What's your opinion of services such as Wombat or other platforms that are pre-built to help fish organization?
I think that SaaS services play a part, and especially when you're doing large-scale phishing. But each tool has its particular place, but I still prefer to use open source tools for certain techniques and attacks. There's one in the back.
6 to 9 months ago, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI said that they considered phishing to be more dangerous than hacking as a whole. Remember that statement?
Yes, I do.
They actually said that was more deadly, more dangerous, and more of a threat. What is that saying?
That's saying that it is a threat, right? I mean, phishing, everyone is phishing right now, right? That still continues to be a threat. In fact, I think the IRS has a training program now that you can take for phishing. But you can't ignore the other threats. We still have phishing attacks and smishing attacks that happen, and especially not only against us personally, but against us in corporations. But yeah, phishing will still be number 1 for a while.
I apologize if I missed this earlier. What about other channels such as Slack?
Such as Slack?
Yeah.
I have to think about that one. So the question is, what about other channels such as Slack?
Yeah. My organization does a lot of security testing.
Mm-hmm.
Myself and my team, because of the nature of the things that we deal with, one of the ones I haven't seen them utilize yet is Slack, which would be a very good vector given the rate at which we are hiring people and new people are joining. So validation against that would be difficult. So somebody could come in and request something, and a junior team member may respond to that and provide access without doing proper validation. And it's not a method that we normally see.
That is a good attack vector, and I'll have to do some more research on that. But that's good, using Slack and other methods of communication. Yeah. Any more questions? Any more questions? Well, I'm sorry. Hey, how are you?
What do you think is the least amount of coverage or that people don't know as much about phishing
Oh, that's a good question. Which of the four have the least amount of coverage? I would say most people know about phishing, and they know about vishing. They know of it or they've experienced it. And you hear more people start talking about USB attacks, and the last would be smishing. People, they don't know what a smish is, or basically a spear phish against a phone, and they don't know how to respond to that. No, thank you.
How do you handle the challenge of having a limited staff size and phishing? Your organization comes familiar with, let's say, 5 people on your team and your voices, so they recognize that.
So how do we handle the limitations of the team size and getting used to the voice? I'm in a large organization, so I do a lot of training and awareness, so I don't do any of the calls, but our teams, they're pretty good. Next question.
Do you ever struggle with companies that have hired you, or whenever you're doing an internal social engineering and testing exercise? Do your employees ever feel victimized? And do you ever experience retaliation or regret if the company got in trouble?
So. Oh, definitely. Oh, so the question is, have we ever brought in a third party or had a third party assessment, people fail or victimized and their feelings? Yes. So that's one of the downsides of kind of doing this, is that you hear a lot of complaints, and we have mailboxes or social networking groups set up for people to express themselves. And in fact, on one of the slides, I was going to mention that I think we've received maybe less than 5 to 10 people who've actually sent emails saying thank you. Most of them are why are you doing this? I don't have time for it in my day. This is my job. I don't care, and things of that nature. So one of the things that we do is I try to give real attacks. I try to get incidents that come across from incident response, and say, here, so you don't care about clicking the email. This is a real attack that came against this person, and the impact would have been X. And that's one thing that I find helps out a lot. Real attacks, using canned examples from a SaaS tool doesn't work. But when you show real examples of a CEO who was attacked, or just a phishing attack against someone within the organization, that turns the lights on. Question. No. So, I believe that people should have the ability to express themselves, but at the same time, they need to understand why we're doing this. So again, communicating. I like real world information. I like using real world attacks to show them the need.
You misunderstand. What I mean, though, is the people that are they upset because of any impact on them other than loss of time because of your attack, or were they penalized at all because they didn't handle it very well?
I think it's a little bit of both. So when you read some of the reviews that we receive back, it is some of it point to training. I haven't had enough training, or we haven't had X amount of training, or it may be I was in the middle of something and I clicked the link because X, and this was unfair because my day's busy. So it's a little bit of both.
How do you measure success and ROI on your effort?
Good one. So return of investment, when you have when you use open source tools, that keeps down the cost, right? Trying to disperse a boatload of USB drives on a frequent basis, I can't say how many, you use cheap drives. I couldn't afford to use rubber duckies all the time, right, because of cost. But the return on investment on the overall program itself, so for me, I really don't have to worry about the click rate going down. I'm not judged by that. That's another department, which is great. But on the other hand, you want to define what your success factor is. And that success factor is really defined by what a user does when they receive a suspicious email or call. Did they follow the right thing? Did they do the right thing, which is reported?
You mentioned earlier about real-world attack and trying to model what would actually happen, but you also said about how it might have been blunderous to interrupt operations. How do you sort of balance the two of doing real-world attacks while not simultaneously affecting operations in a negative way?
So when you look at real world attacks, I can use this. So the attack against the DNC, I believe, had a spear phishing email that was targeted toward cybersecurity, actually, right? When you look at attacks like that, and you look at the operational impact. So you're generally in most organizations, finance, HR, payroll, those are pretty much your high value organizations, and of course you have your executive levels and things of that nature. So when we target those groups, we want to communicate with someone that's in that area. You want to have someone that's in there that champions you and understands what's going on. So when you do send that off, so that you want to communicate basically, so if there's not mass panic when one of those types of scenarios go off.
Do you, and this kind of goes back to another gentleman's question, when people fail tests, people are going to fail. If they fail on a continuous basis, is there a plan that you guys have in place within their own management structure to increase their knowledge and feeling responsibility to this? When they say, I just don't care.
So, okay. So I'm going to shorten it. How do you address someone that doesn't care? Okay, that's a good question because they came up last week in the conversation that I had. How do you know that someone doesn't care? How do you know if someone fails 12 times a year, okay, and they just consistently fail? How do you know that that's egregious? Okay, so one of the thoughts that I had was you want people to do the right thing no matter if they fail or not. You want them to report. Is this person doing the right thing, or are they just failing on purpose? And I think that's probably the only thing that I can really think of. Are they following the proper process for a fail within the organization? Question.
What if they are in the position of power and they continue to fail? What is the, how do you address
that? So if they're in power and they continues to fail, that's still on. The camera's still on, right? There is another group that's responsible for training executives at my organization. I told you I might be unemployed after this. Yeah. So
in the slides, you had mentioned an open source framework you're using that it wasn't a bullet on the slide. Can you repeat that?
There were 3 tools I had listed. One was was SET, Social Engineering Toolkit. The other was Kingfisher. And the last one was the Smartphone Framework by Georgia Weidman.
Okay, I thought there was an extra one. Thank you.
No problem. I got like 2 minutes. Question?
When we constantly get calls, such as phishing and things like that, what do we do to stop the calls? Because the do not call list does not work.
What do we do to stop phishing calls? Because the do not call list does not work. That's a good one. Go ahead.
So the FTC has an entire contest based on that entire principle of how do we as a community solve that. So FTC, so talk to them, participate in the contest.
FTC. And let it go to voicemail. I mean, one of the problems is that a lot of times these guys are using VoIP, right? And you block that number and it's going to pop up like a whack-a-mole. So I think the most important thing is to try to document where those numbers are coming from, communicate to people on what actions to take. At this point, with all the options out there to spoof phone numbers, it's really hard to say that I'm going to block numbers from this certain range. So, but FTC, that's the start. All right, that's it. Thank you so much. One more question.
Just a sideline. Going back to people who don't care, we have a growing market out there for contract labor and for people who may be in lower positions but have very essential access to organization parts of the environment. The amount of training that they get, they may not necessarily be passionate about the organization itself. They may be contracted out to a separate organization and have their own processes. How do you account for that? How do you pull that into the security policy that you have in your core organization?
So I'm going to try to sum this up. Users who have access to who have elevated access who don't care, right? Or it's still, well, actually, users who have elevated access, our organization do treat them a little differently. I shouldn't be saying that, but when you have someone that has an elevated privilege, they should be treated differently as far as training and awareness, and also they should be held to a higher standard. I mean, if you have admin access and you fail continuously, you're putting your organization at risk a little bit more than someone on a that's a customer service on a box with less access. So, and again, that's my opinion, not the organization. So, all right, I'm getting pushed out of here. So, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.